Hello, welcome everyone. We are ready to start. Sorry for the delay. We've been having technical issues. Um, I think Julia or Lupin, would you like to start?
Yes, I'm quoted to start. I'd be happy to. All right, going. So, hey everyone, welcome to what is the most exciting ISCABC yet. I'm Julia Vasconcelos, an undergraduate student, veterinary medicine at the Federal University of Alagoas in Brazil. I'm one of your student organizers for this conference. So, seeing people from literally different continents in the participant list is giving me chills, and it means that we did it. We've tried to build this global community of student researchers.
Yeah, thank you, Julia, for being here. And hi, everyone. My name is Lupin. I'm an undergraduate. I'm a biology student, and I'm currently studying in Brazil at the Federal University of Alagoas. And I'm so amazed that we did this because it's been a lot of work, and everyone involved in this event knows that how much trouble we went, and a lot of things that went wrong and went right. But the thing is that we did it, and we are here right now. And I'd like to welcome all of you to be here and to enjoy it.
My name is Dejanira. I am a PhD student at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, and I'm sorry, give me one moment. I'm having technical difficulties. Okay, sorry for that. My computer was running out of battery. But yes, my name is Dejanira Aranda. I am a PhD student at Universidad Nacional Autónoma de México, and I work on the area of biophysics. I've been with the ISCABC since the third conference. First, I participated just as an attendee, and now as an organizer. And I feel that this community have continued to grow stronger and more passionate about the work we're doing.
So before we begin, please take a moment to note in the chat where you're joining from and the species or behavior you're studying. I want to see the diversity we've created together. Please, Lupin, if you want to start.
Yes, of course. I'm, as I said before, I am from the Federal University of Alagoas, and currently I have worked with squirrels, and I am also involved in some research with dogs.
Perfect. Dejanira, do you want to maybe add some information on your future study?
Yes, I do collective behavior, collective movement with fish, with guppies. They are really cool to work with, and I am trying to prove some biophysics concepts from with live animals, in this case, guppies.
Okay, so to finish, I'll say a little bit about my experience as a veterinary study undergraduate, actually, in the behavior field. I study neurodegenerative disorders such as epilepsy, and we evaluate in terms of behavior, epileptic crisis. So that's my field of research.
Perfect. I didn't specify before, but my research with squirrels was on their social behavior and how they learned. And if they, in one of my presentations that's going to happen is about handedness or laterality, that basically is about if they have if their brains have a specific laterality or not. And yeah, that's it. Thank you everyone for sharing, and I hope this we can share a lot more in the involved behavior field and learn more from everyone that's going to present.
Same.
Well, I think we can start with the plenary if Matt is available and everything. So I will get him here. Hello, Matt.
Hi, everyone. Nice to meet you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for coming. And we would like to start the plenary with Dr. Matthew Fuirst. Sorry if I butchered your last name.
No worries.
He is a researcher. And let's just, sorry. Let's just let him talk to us about his work. And please, the microphone is yours.
Sounds great. Thank you very much. Well, just to echo what everybody said already, I think it's very impressive what you've put together. It's a challenging feat to have a student and volunteer run organization and to put together a whole conference, whether it be both virtual or in person. So you should applaud yourselves, and I think it's going to be a great meeting. I'm going to try to share my screen. Give me a moment. Okay, this is interesting. This is a new program that I've used, so forgive me if I am also troubleshooting. Okay. Can someone verbally tell me if you can see what's on the slides? Yes? No?
We cannot see your screen.
No. Okay.
So let's just troubleshoot. One moment. Okay, so we saw it for a moment.
Okay, hold on one moment. So I'm going to share. Can you see this PowerPoint?
Okay, yes, we can see it now.
Okay. Can you see it now? Still?
Yes, we can see it, but I don't know if you are projecting the slides, but we are not seeing it. We're just seeing your screen, like the PowerPoint screen.
Oh, I see. Okay. Sorry, give me a moment then. So if I press, when I click the from current slide, it doesn't seem to want to go into present mode. Bear with me. Sorry. Screen 2. Okay. Okay, so you can see that, correct?
Yes.
Okay. And if I do that, does the slide fill
Okay,
the
we can see full screen now.
Okay, so it looks good now? You can see it?
Yes.
All right, fantastic. Thank you for the help. We're in business.
Thank you.
Fantastic. Okay, well, I'll get going then. First of all, I just want to thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be here, and thank you all for your time. I'm really looking forward to sharing my work with all of you on animal behavior. Kind of to repeat what's already been said, one really amazing part about these meetings is we get to hear about different species and different study systems from across the world. So it's great to hear that we have representation on this conference from various countries, and I'm at least representing Canada today. So amazingly, it actually just finally got hot here in Canada in the past week. It's now in the high 20s today, but it's been a fairly cold season so far for us. And I'll be talking about Canada jays, which are a species that I study, which actually rely on the cold. They thrive in it. And so I'll be talking more about that during my talk. And so, first of all, I just want to acknowledge that the field work that we do for this work is on the traditional lands of the Anishinaabe and Algonquin First Nations. And so, what this talk will primarily be about is the process of dispersal. So, dispersal could be defined as the movement of any organism from its point of origin to another location where it might reproduce. All plants and animals disperse, whether it's thousands of kilometers or a few centimeters. You might have seedlings from a host plant that must grow at a certain distance away from the mother parent plant in order to obtain enough water, nutrients, and light to survive. Similarly, animals have to disperse. They have to disperse to avoid competition, for resources, mates, foods, and therefore dispersal is really important in kind of a key life history stage for many species. Unfortunately, in many species, dispersal is one of the least understood periods of an animal's life cycle. And the reasons for this are that in many animals, juveniles can be difficult to study. They might be cryptic and hard to find. Juveniles have higher mortality rates, so it can be difficult to study juveniles. And because of this, we don't really have a good understanding of dispersal. What we do know, however, is that there are these three core stages of dispersal. Dispersal involves departure from the originating territory. Then an individual moves through the landscape during a stage of transience and eventually settles on a new territory where it aims to breed. Now, what's interesting about dispersal is there's various forms of dispersal. And so one option is for one individual to be within the study area and for it to then reproduce in the study area the next year. Those individuals we consider, we being research ecologists, those who study animal behavior, those are individuals that are site faithful. They exhibit high site fidelity to their breeding territory. Now, an adult that is site faithful may also at any point during its life move to another territory and exhibit breeding dispersal. So this is when an individual, specifically an adult, will move from one home to another. When we're monitoring populations, that process of moving from one territory to another is breeding dispersal. But when it happens outside of the boundaries of our study populations, then we can classify it as emigration. These are individuals that are leaving the population. Now, for juveniles, a juvenile may start at a originating territory. This is likely where that individual was born. And in some species, they might delay dispersal. They might exhibit what's called philopatry, where individuals might choose to stay in that home territory for another year or often more. Now, if an individual leaves that home territory in its first year, then that individual is exhibiting natal dispersal, or what's called juvenile dispersal, where those individuals move from the place of birth to another location where they attempt to breed. And like I mentioned about the adults, individuals that leave that natal territory or that home territory exhibit emigration or natal dispersal outside of the population. And so what we know from the literature is that there's various mechanisms that can drive dispersal. It's most often influenced by proximate mechanisms such as sex, age, body condition, and social status. But we also know that dispersal can be influenced by a variety of ultimate factors, such as the availability of other breeders, habitat quality for breeding territories, the competition for mates and resources, as well as the need to move away from your home in order to spread your genes and therefore avoid inbreeding. And so this happens across the animal kingdom. Now, notably, through kind of an evaluation of the literature, we found that for natal dispersal and breeding dispersal, most find that there is a varying effect, both positive and negative, of how dispersal might influence an individual or a population. And so what you see here is that the causes of dispersal differ based on whether or not an individual is a juvenile or an adult. So natal dispersal for juveniles seems to be more positively affected by sex, the density of a population, habitat quality, whereas dispersal might be more influenced by social status, body condition, and habitat for adults. So these are things to consider when forming hypotheses and determining questions that we wanted to ask related to dispersal. Now, even though I mentioned that dispersal is a understudied life history stage, it's important to study dispersal in wild animals. And the reason for this is that dispersal is the glue cementing subpopulations and allowing connections between often isolated patches of species. And so it can have drastic effects on social organization, population dynamics, the maintenance of species ranges, and genetic flow. And because of this, it's important to understand dispersal in order to improve conservation efforts and determine how populations may respond to environmental change. And so when we look back at the literature and determine kind of to what extent is dispersal affected, many papers on natal dispersal, juvenile dispersal, find that there's a negative effect on survival and reproductive performance, basically saying that juvenile dispersal is a risky process. And we see that similarly for breeding dispersal. Now, interestingly, when we talk about whether or not dispersal has increased or decreased in terms of who's studying dispersal, we see that it's becoming more popular over the last few decades. People are studying dispersal more often, and they're doing it with a variety of different methods that are also increasing in our availability. So tracking technologies for radio tags, GPS tags, and geologgers, as well as satellite tags, are increasing, and therefore studies that evaluate dispersal and use these methods are also increasing, which is great. It's giving us a better picture and a better understanding of what's happening in the animal kingdom related to dispersal. So today I'll be talking about kind of 4 different research papers and projects that focused on dispersal. One being what factors influence individuals, specifically Canada jays, to disperse as a juvenile, and how does that influence their survival? Using that information, we then evaluated what the long-term fitness consequences of dispersal strategies are for this species. Then we'll kind of pause and shift to adults. We'll look at causes and patterns of adult dispersal, breeding dispersal, as well as those short and long-term fitness consequences for adults, basically asking if an adult does choose to leave its home territory and breed elsewhere, what are the consequences to that? And so going into what are the causes of first-year survival and delayed dispersal? Well, firstly, I haven't introduced our study species yet. So all of the projects that I'll be talking about and the findings that I have are related to the Canada jay. So for many of you, you might not be familiar with the Canada jay. It's a remarkable species. They are not migratory, so they live in North America year-round, specifically in the boreal and subalpine ecosystems of the US and Canada. Now, what makes Canada jays quite unique is they are heavily dependent on stored food that then they rely on during the winter when it's a snowy abyss and there's very little live resources available. They will basically eat the food that they've cached and rely on that for their overwinter survival and reproductive success. What makes the Canada jays unique in addition to this is they have massive territories. So this photo is a photo that I took in a plane over our study population in Algonquin Provincial Park, which is in Ontario, Canada. And here we see a territory of a Canada jay that's located in the spruce bog. So this white outline is kind of showing the outline of one Canada jay territory. These territories are about 130 hectares in size. And importantly, because I mentioned they're resident, they're non-migratory, they're maintained year-round. And this year-round component is really crucial to kind of understand the implications of what I've been talking about and what I will continue to talk about. So just to break down the annual cycle for Canada jays, Canada jays in the fall, in October, begin to cache thousands of food items, specifically mushrooms, berries, meat, etc. And so for Canada jays, this is a really crucial time. The ability to basically cache food is crucial to their life history. It involves them storing food, and then they rely on it throughout the rest of the year. And so the photo on the top right is actually a piece of food that these birds store. They put it in the bark of trees, and that's where then they find it in the winter. And so the brown semicircle, the brown shading here, kind of outlines where they are caching, and then they start breeding in the middle winter. So in February, they will build their nest, eventually having young. And during that entire time, during this green shaded bar, they are relying on the food that they've stored to keep them through these very cold winters. So I study Canada jays in Algonquin Park, which is a provincial park in Ontario, Canada. It's on the southern extent of this species' breeding range in Canada. But what's unique to this population within Algonquin Provincial Park is the population has severely declined by over 50% in the last couple of decades. Here's a map of all of the Canada jay territories in our study population. Each circle is a different territory. And so here's what the population looked like in 1970. And if we shift to a few years ago in 2021, this is how many territories are occupied. So we can really see the decrease in occupancy and how few territories are really left now. Now we're able to determine who's around and what territories are occupied through a biannual census where we count all of the individuals in the population and band them as well. This involves a ton of backcountry expeditions where we're walking through the snow or hiking or paddling in order to find these birds in the landscape. Now, one really unique part or aspect of Canada jays as a species is they have a very unique social system. And what I mean by that is every year when a nest fledges, there is a sibling expulsion process that happens. This sibling expulsion process results in one juvenile of a given nest staying on the home territory that dominant juvenile then kicks out its siblings. It says, hey, brother, sister, you have to leave. And it kicks out its siblings, forcing the siblings to have to find a home elsewhere. And so for these siblings that are kicked out, which I call ejectees, there are several outcomes that can happen. They can become breeders at a new territory. They might be adopted by adults in another territory, or they may be alone and they might not find anyone. And so this process is really crucial, and it allowed us to study what the patterns of sibling expulsion are. So we used radio tags and put them on 14-day-old nestlings that were sampled and tracked them every 3 days until they were fledging. At that point, we then tracked them once a week until they dispersed. And the reason for this was to basically determine how many how many nestlings fledge and survive to fledging, and how many of the fledglings survive to actually disperse or be kicked out. And if they do leave their territory, where do they go? And so we tracked them on foot using ground telemetry until eventually we couldn't track them anymore because birds can fly and that makes it difficult for us to follow them. And so once they moved far enough for us to, struggle to find them on the ground, we were able to track them via an airplane and determine how far these birds left or went when they left their territory, which then determines or helps us determine if these juveniles survived or died after leaving home. And what we found was that those individuals that stayed at home, those dominant birds that kicked their siblings out, were more often than not individuals that were of higher body condition. So they were heavier and healthier individuals. They were also more likely to be male. And so when we look at the survival curve, we can see that males have a higher cumulative annual survival for their first year as opposed to females. But what's interesting about this figure is you see this vertical dotted line around 60 days. That's where the survival curve really starts to separate. And the reason for this is because around 60 days is around the time in which individuals are either kicked out or get to stay at home. And so that tells us that this life stage point where they get kicked out might be really important for their chance of surviving. It might basically mean that if you stay at home and you become a dominant juvenile, that you have a much higher probability of survival than your siblings that you kick out. And so we compared that across social status as well. And we did find that individuals that had higher cumulative annual survival in the first year were more likely to be dominant juveniles as opposed to ejectees. That split, again, is around 60 days, where we see a drastic change in survival probability amongst individuals of different social status. So dominant juveniles were essentially 2 times more likely to survive their first summer than ejectees following the sibling expulsion phase. However, what's important to know by these blue shaded bars is that even though ejectees experienced lower first summer survival, if they managed to survive until fall, they had a relatively similar probability of surviving through the winter as their dominant siblings. And so what this tells us is that if you are a dominant juvenile and you kick your siblings out, you're definitely more likely to survive that first summer, where you get to reap the benefits of staying home, you know the landscape, you know where food is, and you have the protection from your parents to avoid predators, as opposed to your ejectee sibling that's kicked out and has to survive in the wilderness alone in an unfamiliar land. However, if both of them survive until the fall, then that survival probability evens out a little bit. And so this was really compelling. This told us, okay, there are clearly survival benefits to staying home. There's clearly survival benefits to remaining in your home territory. But then that led us to ask, what are the lifetime fitness consequences of being that dominant juvenile? Aside from first-year survival, are there more benefits to being a dominant juvenile? And one well-known way in the animal behavior literature to calculate fitness of individuals in social groups is using what's called Hamilton's rule, which states that for any gene of any social action to undergo selection, it needs to basically have the sum of indirect fitness and direct fitness while accounting for relatedness to exceed 0. And so we applied this broad calculation that's it's a golden standard in animal behavior for calculating fitness. We applied this to our study population to basically ask, what are the inclusive fitness benefits for dominant juveniles? And so we calculated inclusive fitness of dominant juveniles and ejectees. And to do this, we first determined the direct fitness of the two juvenile classes. And so we defined direct fitness for dominant juveniles as essentially the lifetime proportion of individuals that individual recruited into the population. And so dominant juveniles clearly have more lifetime fitness or direct fitness because they, as you can see here, they recruit more young into the population than ejectees. And so we use that metric as an estimate of direct fitness. Now, since ejectees don't remain on the natal territory, we determined that their inclusive fitness to be equal to their direct fitness. So essentially, any ejectee, their indirect fitness metric was the equivalent of how many offspring they would recruit into the population. And so combining different factors such as first summer survival, which is a cost, it costs something in terms of inclusive fitness to kick your siblings out and cause them to be at higher risk. We accounted for that in addition to direct fitness to basically determine whether or not dominant juveniles gained an inclusive fitness benefit for their social status. And what we found was that dominant juveniles don't gain a substantial benefit from helping at the nest or feeding young, but they do incur a cost for ejecting their siblings, which is very unique. Not many species in the animal kingdom kick out their siblings, even though it is consequential to their own survival. However, overall, neither factors really strongly influenced inclusive fitness, which was driven by differences in long-term reproductive success and survival. And so to wrap up the juvenile dispersal aspects, the fight to delay dispersal is primarily driven by survival benefits. It means a lot and has extreme value to be that dominant juvenile because you reap survival benefits. You get the benefit of adding your survival probability, as well as reaping the benefits of having food from your parents and knowing the landscape. Now, ejectees are more vulnerable after they get kicked out, as I mentioned earlier. And so those long-term fitness differences for Canada jays are primarily driven by the social status of these individuals that enhances first-year survival. So getting a clear picture of what causes juvenile survival and what are the consequences led us then to ask, what happens with the adults? Basically, what are the mechanisms driving breeding dispersal? And so using the long-term data from this population, we examined what the factors are that cause an adult to leave its home territory, leave where it's already breeding. And so we included a variety of different predictors, such as the proximity to a nearby territory, habitat quality. For this species, habitat quality is defined by the percentage of coniferous trees, because those are the trees that they rely on for breeding and food storage, as well as the density of other individuals and some other demographic factors, such as whether or not an individual lost a mate. Maybe if an individual lost a mate, that they would go searching for a new one. And so we included all of these factors to examine what the causes of breeding dispersal were, as well as what causes variation in breeding dispersal distance. And what we found was that generally in Canada jays, they don't like to move very far, or they don't like to leave at all. And so here you can see that the proportion of dispersal events was much more likely when a mate was absent. And so we found that less than 10% of breeding events resulted in an adult actually moving. But when they moved, it was more likely influenced by mate loss. And so what this tells us is that Canada jays as a species are very reliant on their home territory. They stay put and they have high site fidelity. But if their mate dies, they're going to go looking for a new one, and they're going to leave home instead of staying at home and pretty much reaping the benefits of staying close by. Now, what we found in addition to that was that there is a clear sex bias in dispersal distance. We found that females will disperse further than males, which is on par with the greater literature about birds. And in addition to that, if there was a territory that was vacant nearby, individuals were more likely to disperse. And so there was a positive correlation towards territory vacancy and dispersal distance. So when we examined what those short and long-term effects of breeding dispersal were, we were curious of, okay, we know that now these birds will leave and come home, or leave and not return home in order to breed elsewhere, but what are the effects of that? And so what we wanted to look at was reproduction. We looked at lay date, being how early these individuals lay their eggs, brood size, that being the number of offspring in a given nest, and proportion of successful nests throughout an individual's lifetime. And what we found was individuals had a higher brood size and probability of nest success during the year after they dispersed. So that's what those two right-hand panels indicate. You can see that dispersal benefited reproduction during the year following them moving to a new territory. Further, we investigated how dispersal conditions carry over to impact reproduction. And so we want to look at whether or not when an individual disperses, if that influences their reproduction. And what we found was that individuals that dispersed during the fall or winter were actually more likely to have lower reproduction than individuals that dispersed during the summer. And we speculate that the reason for that is because individuals that disperse during the fall are leaving their territory in the middle of the season that they're reliant on food storage. So they're essentially storing food on one territory that then they need for overwinter survival, but leaving home. And so they have to pretty much start anew on a different territory and accumulate a brand new collection of food items that they store. Now, we found that this effect of seasonality on reproduction, both for just before and after dispersal, was also influenced by whether or not an individual moved to a low quality territory. So what we found was that if an individual moved as an adult, if they moved to a lower quality territory, that also reduced nest success. Now, dispersers recruited an average of 0.92 more offspring over the course of their lifetime, which produced an average of 2.7 more offspring. So what this shows that is not only on a short term, so going back a slide, looking at these before and after plots of how their reproduction is impacted the year after they disperse, but also once they disperse, they most often remain site faithful on a territory. And so here we can see that those that disperse generally recruited more offspring into the population over the course of their lifetime. So there seem to be these short and long-term benefits to dispersal for adults. And what this tells us in summary for adult dispersal is that, as I mentioned already, adults are highly site faithful. Canada jays don't like to move to a different territory. They don't like to disperse far at all. However, if they do disperse as an adult, it's more often motivated by the loss of their mate. And we speculate that this might be because this population is decreasing. And so it makes more sense for an individual to go and search for a new mate than to sit on your given territory, and wait for a new mate to appear. We see that for adults, there are these short and long-term benefits that exist. Reproduction seems to improve for those that do switch. And that might be because they're doing it at a good time, or it might mean that mate loss is actually a factor that allows them to improve territory quality and go and find a new home. And so in conclusion, what we see for both juveniles and adults is that social status plays a major role for individual fitness. We see that the causes and consequences of dispersal vary whether you're a juvenile or an adult. If you're a juvenile, it's very risky to disperse because you're thrown into the wilderness to survive on your own. You don't know where food is. You have to escape predators, and you have to exert the energy to find a breeding territory. And therefore, as a juvenile, it benefits you to stay and remain site faithful. But what's interesting is we find that it's the opposite for adults. For adults, if you have the opportunity, though it being rare, to move to another territory, it benefits you both in the short and the long term. But one thing I really want to highlight is that all of these patterns clearly highlight that food caching drives these dispersal patterns. We see that in the second project that I mentioned related to juvenile survival, individuals that are leaving their home territory are more likely to die than the ones that get to stay. And one reason for that is the pressures of needing to find food and the energy that is exerted to cache food on a new territory. Similarly, those inclusive benefits or inclusive fitness benefits to staying are exacerbated by the fact that you get to stay and reap the benefits of food that you can find on your home territory. For adults, the timing and the choice to move to a different territory is sensitive, and that's likely because if you move to a new territory, whether it's due to mate loss or some other factor, you need to account for the fact that you need to acquire food stores at your new home that help you survive through the winter. And so pretty much we find that regardless of if you're a juvenile or an adult, all of these factors are influenced to some degree by the need to store food. It's a key life history stage for these individuals, and it cascades throughout their lifetime to basically drive these different patterns of dispersal as juveniles and adults. So with that, I would like to thank all of our funders in Canada and worldwide, as well as my PhD advisor at the time and all of our collaborators on this project. And with that, I'll take any questions.
Hello, Dr. Matt. Thank you so much for your presentation. It was very interesting. And one question that was in my mind actually was about the percentage of females and males. They said that males were more likely to survive. So it means that in general there are more males than females, and the percentage is more. Because normally we have a 50-50%. So I'd like to know more about that.
Yeah, no, it's a great question. So what we find is that the sex ratios of the broods for the species are usually female dominated. So there are more females, but what happens is the females are more likely to be the ones that are kicked out. The males are often the ones that stay. And because of the fact that these females leave, we have a poorer understanding of female survivorship. So that's why I did this study. That's why we implemented the radio tags to follow everyone, not just bias our results and our findings to those that survive and stay. But even with all the work that I did, we're definitely underestimating how many females we detect. The females are more likely to leave. So it's not that we have a population of only males, it's more that within our study population, the dominant juveniles that we observe are more often males, because the females we either can detect via radio tracking or they disappear and we don't see them again. But it's not a black and white answer. We still pretty much have a lot of females in the population that we still monitor. It's just a proportion.
That's really interesting. Based on that, it is also possible that, for example, the females are more flexible in the environment, like they're more likely to disperse more and find other territories.
Yeah, that's a great question. It's possible that they're more flexible. One behavioral thing that we have speculated is that the males in this species are the ones that initiate nest building. And so males, generally in animals, males are more often territorial than females, but nest building is different. In some species, a pair will build a nest together, or the male, the female, will do more of the effort. And so what we think might be happening is that the females have more flexibility to move around because they're not the ones that initiate the nest building.
That's really interesting.
Does that answer your question?
Yeah, of course.
Okay.
Thank you. Danita, do you have any questions?
I do have a question, but it's more about why you decided to work with this specific organism. Was it because you wanted to study like the pattern of movement, and that's what was the organism that adapted better to your question, or was it the other way around? Like you really liked this bird and decided that you wanted to study it?
Well, I definitely do really like these birds, but I would say the reason for me studying this species and this population was the value in long-term data. So I guess I didn't highlight it as well as I could have, but this population of Canada jays is the longest running study population of birds in the Western Hemisphere. We've been monitoring Canada jays in this population since the 1960s, which is incredible. And because of that, it allows researchers like myself to answer questions or ask questions related to life history, movement, and things that you can really detect on a long-term scale. And so my research interests generally, and what I do for my work currently, are movement ecology focused. And this population and this project allowed me to kind of apply those ideas to the study population.
And how do you think how complicated was it to start with your project? For us as students, it's kind of complicated. So what were your struggles?
Yeah, I think with any project, there's going to be challenges as you navigate what works and doesn't work. I was fortunate that this population was already being studied when I started as a graduate student. And to preface, I finished as a graduate student. I finished my PhD several years ago, and the project still continues. I think the main challenge for me, though, was figuring out if using the technologies that I was using, if that would allow me to answer the questions. There was a lot of field work that I had to do in order to basically determine if the tags or if the frequency that I went into the field would allow me to get the resolution of data that I wanted. So from the perspective of graduate students, trialing things, piloting out seasons is key because it allows you to assess what may or may not work.
Well, thank you. Lupin, do you have another question?
Yes, we actually have a question from the people who are watching, and Jessica said,
Awesome.
asked, if dispersal in adults is beneficial, why are they so site faithful?
Can you repeat the question? Sorry.
If dispersal in adults is beneficial, why are they so site faithful? Why do they keep it?
Yeah, it's a great point. I think they're site faithful because of the need to cache food and rely on that cached food throughout the winter. So essentially, these birds, generally speaking, are site faithful. We see that for the juveniles, the dominant juveniles clearly fight to stay. And the adults, even though it benefits them to leave, we don't see them leave very often. So there is a pretty large proportion of individuals that don't leave. It's just those rare instances when they do, then it benefits them. And so I think they're just site faithful because they live in this extreme environment where they're breeding in the heart of the winter and they need to survive on their cached food. So it's risky to leave.
And based on that, is there also an overlap in territories, or are they very separated?
They're pretty separated. Their territories are quite big, and they don't really overlap. Sometimes you have locations where multiple territories might have a border near each other, but you don't have multiple pairs on the same territory.
Perfect. And about them being territorial, are they also, how can I say, do they allow other species of birds in their territory, or no?
Oh yeah. They will coexist with other birds. That's no problem, aside from those that are predators for them. Another North American species, the blue jay, is on their territory as well, but they are competitors for food. But yeah, they will allow other species on their territory as well. They just have different niches so they don't compete.
Okay, thank you so much. I think that's it. And just one last thing, if you were to give an advice for the students who are going to graduate school and they're in their early careers, what would that be?
It's a big question. I would say the first thing that comes to mind is try to find a project that you love, because the passion for what you do will translate into the quality of work that you do.
Perfect. That's really awesome. Thank you so much. Have a great
Thank you
day.
very much. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, everyone, that was our first plenary. I think we started with an awesome presentation, and I hope everyone enjoyed as much as I did. If you have any more questions, please contact us, and we can share with us maybe his email so you can ask more questions about his work. And thank you so much for being here. Anita, you'd like to say anything?
Well, just thank you everyone for accompanying us today, and we hope to see you again tomorrow. Tomorrow it's at 10 a.m. In Central Standard Time, and at
It is going to be
1 p.m.
Yeah, 1 p.m.
in Brasilia time.
Exactly.
So thanks everyone, and have a nice day. See you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.